Hey, welcome back to a new installment of the Wide Right Podcast. Manny Navarro here from The Athletic, joined once again by Carlos Ledo of the MIA All Day Pod. It's Wednesday, May 15th, right around 1:30 p.m. Carlos, you and I haven't done a podcast in a while. In fact, the last time I did anything, it was with a Gators beat writer. We got a chance to kind of preview what was going on with the Gators. So it's been a few weeks since we've talked Canes. The transfer portal kind of came and went, closed up. Miami ended up adding some really good pieces in the portal. Damian Martinez, Sam Brown, Simeon Barrow Jr., the defensive lineman out of Michigan State, Jalen Alderman, Diani Hill, two more guys on defense at linebacker and cornerback. Um, 13 guys basically brought in via the portal. One of the more experienced hauls, 287 combined starts between all 13 guys Miami added via the transfer portal this year, Carlos. Savion Riley, the one guy who left, so he does. I didn't count him as part of the 14 because he's gone. But good work by Mario Cristobal. And then the draft took place. You and I haven't talked since the draft took place. And Cam Kitchens ends up going in the third round. The other guys that Miami was interested in and hoping would get drafted were day three guys. So a lot to talk about. We're gonna make this a fun episode, though. We're gonna have sort of a off season fun topic to digest. But let's start with the additions to the roster, what happened with the draft, and anything else going on in your life.
Well, that's a loaded question, and then let's digest the fact that you substituted me for a Gator beat writer the last time you did a podcast, which is a slap in the face not only to me, but a slap in the face to the Florida State fandom who loves you so much. Um, so yeah, man, I think like we talked about before, the more talent you could add to this roster, which is still lacking in talent. I mean, it's not just that it's lacking in talent. I think it's lacking experienced talent in certain areas because they need to fill the gaps between young guys and guys that can contribute immediately. And we've talked a lot on the show about to be able to be an elite team, you need experienced depth and depth that can sort of help the young guys progress and develop without having to be thrown into the fray right away. And when they're not ready, because that can stunt development a little bit. You want to get them reps, but you don't want to rely on them as starters, as guys that you need to count on day in and day out until they're ready to do that. And I think adding additional talent, additional experienced guys helps bring along this roster and balance it out a little bit because Mario's recruiting a lot of talent, a lot of really young, talented young guys coming out of high school. But those guys aren't necessarily ready to play right away. And if you're going to be successful, you need some older dudes to be able to go out there and make some plays for you and then sprinkle in these young guys when they're ready. So I think the additions they brought in are going to be helpful. We're still concerned about the secondary. Still concerned about a couple areas in the roster, but I think this helps a lot. And like we talked about last time, I think 9 wins should be the floor for this team. Anything under 9 wins to me is a disappointing season.
Well, and I think most odds makers agree with you. They think this should be a team that wins at least 9 or 10 games. If the over underline for wins is 9.5, so I think a lot of people look at this roster, they look at the ACC, and they say, man, the excuses are sort of out the window. I did this research the other day, Carlos. I literally spent a long time doing this with Kelvin on the phone, which
Oh
takes a long
Jesus!
time anytime
Wow.
you have Kelvin Harris on the phone with you. There's only 7 players on the 85-man roster that were not recruited to Miami via the transfer portal or the traditional high school ranks that are quote unquote uh, Mario Cristobal guys. I mean, 7 guys came here when Manny Diaz was still the coach. Everybody else, Mario had to sort of give the approval for. Can you name those 7 guys? Who do you think they are, Carlos? If you were to go down the list right now, of who's actually on Miami's roster still, that is,
Still on the roster.
yeah.
Hmm, dude. I don't know, man. I'm just there's. I'm not gonna think about it. That's gonna take way too long for me.
Well, I'll give you 2 right off the bat. They're both receivers. Xavier Restrepo, Jacoby George, Miami's
Hmm.
top 2 receivers in terms of production. Both of those guys were brought in during the Manny Diaz era. Elijah Arroyo,
Hmm.
a Manny Diaz guy. Zion Nelson, who I think is probably going to medically retire. He's still technically a
Jalen
uh,
Rivers, right?
Jalen Rivers is another one as well. And I think Ryan Rodriguez is the other one. He came in 2021. Those are the 6
Right.
guys on offense. There's only one Manny Diaz guy left on defense. Can you guess who it is?
Ooh, I cannot.
Chase Smith. the
Chase
linebacker
Smith.
who
I
is
forgot he was even on the roster, to be quite
yeah,
honest
who
with
is
you.
right. So this team from top to bottom has Mario's fingerprints all over it. There's really no excuse for it. 78 of the 85 on scholarship right now are Mario guys. So everybody's sort of the feeling that this is the time Miami has to start winning. It's supposed to
Yeah,
be
and
their
listen, like
time.
you said, it's out the window now, right? Now, man, he can't go back and say, "Listen, I've been dealing with this guy's roster. I've been having to turn the roster over. You know, it's still not my team. It's still not the guys that I want here. You know, the profile of the players isn't what I'm looking for. All that's out the window now. Now these guys are handpicked by him. So whatever happens from here on out, these are the players you picked. You got the ingredients you wanted. My boy went to Publix or he used Instacart, which I've been using for 5 years. I did that shit before it was cool. Before COVID, I was using Instacart mainly because I hate people and I hate human interaction. And I really hate human interaction in a grocery store. So I avoid all human contact. But yeah, so he shot for the ingredients, man. He went out there, he got his sazon, he got his seasoning, and he's ready to go. So if the meal tastes like shit, guess who you got to blame? The chef.
That's certainly one way to put it. Yeah, and look, the bottom line is the results are supposed to start changing by year three. Most guys, he's got the same coaching staff pretty much in place, especially the two coordinators. That's what matters. You don't have to shuffle in a new coordinator. So there's a lot of consistency for Mario. Let's talk about the NFL draft briefly for a moment because this will be a topic we dive into a little bit later, with something we like to call guys who made mistakes entering the draft early. Um, these were the four players, the four Hurricanes that were drafted in the 2024 draft. Carlos Cameron Kitchens, as I mentioned earlier, went to the Rams with the 99th overall pick. Then you had three seventh rounders. Jaden Davis, the transfer from Oklahoma, the cornerback who I thought was outstanding, had a really, really good year. Matt Lee, the center who I thought did a fantastic job. He went to the Cincinnati Bengals. And then, of course, safety James Williams, seventh round pick, goes to Tennessee. One of the guys who was not drafted that left early with eligibility left was Leonard Taylor. And I know Miami fans, anytime that kind of stuff happens, they get really, really angry about it. I'm going to give you a chance to sort of tease the subject that we're going to discuss later on. But when you see those results and you say, man, there's four Hurricanes drafted, seems about right for a 6-7 team or a 7-6 team rather.
Yes, but also you have to think about the guys that were drafted and where they were drafted. So only two of those guys were actually recruited by Miami,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the two that were recruited by Miami, one was an All-American the previous year. If he would have stayed another year and he was coming, yeah, I think he had an injury riddled year, Cam
Yes.
Kitchens. It really affected his play. I think had he stayed another year and proven that he was still the guy he was the year before, he might have been a first round pick. So that's the challenge there. And James Williams to me, everybody loved James Williams. You love to talk him up, love the hype. There was people that loved him since he was recruited, and really made excuses for him the entire time he was here at the University of Miami. And I kept saying the tape doesn't show it. And they wouldn't listen. But look, he got drafted in the seventh round. Not only did he get drafted in the seventh round, Manny, do you know what position he's playing right now?
Linebacker.
He is playing linebacker, which is the position everybody said he should have been playing in college, but they refused to move him.
I thought he should have
Look
been
at
an
that.
edge rusher personally, but
I thought he
that
should have been an edge too, but I mean, at least an outside linebacker. If you could have put him in an odd front scheme as an outside linebacker, it would have been perfect because his best play was in the box. But hey, it is what it is, man. Guys make these decisions, and I think kids nowadays not only do they want to jump to the NFL as quickly as possible and run for the money, but I think they're resistant to change at the college level, switching positions because they think, for whatever reason they got recruited at that position. I was a 5-star in this position. I should stay at this position. But as soon as they get to the NFL, hey, when you're fighting for a job and you're fighting for your life, you're willing to change to that linebacker spot, aren't you? I mean, it's a situation where the expectations of these players coming out of high school into college and when they're in their college career, they need to change. They need to be able to shift. They need to be able to be more adaptable and listen and be coachable, and have the opportunity or give themselves the opportunity to make the changes necessary to put themselves in the best position possible. And I'm not just saying this to knock James Williams. I think had he been open to playing linebacker, had he made the switch, he might have been a first round pick at that position, or even an edge, like you're saying. He could have been another Greg Rousseau, a guy that came out of nowhere that used to be a safety and ended up putting his hand in the ground and became an All-American. You've got to be able to be adaptable and be able to be coachable and make decisions that are not only best for yourself, but for your team, and also have long-term vision with it. I think a lot of these guys don't have enough long-term vision in terms of decisions that they're making. They're thinking about the here and now. And then when they're hit in the face with reality, that's when they're willing to adapt and change.
Well, I think, unfortunately, it's funny that we sit here and have this conversation because Larry Bluestein and everybody else, we all were like, man, James Williams would be amazing if they played him in the box. And people were like, oh, the coaches know better, they know this and that. And you know what? The majority of the time they do, Carlos. But I would say this. People who know football and they can see what they can see with their eyes.
Yeah.
And I think we all sort of saw with James Williams. But you know what? I hope the best for the kid. He's been
Yeah,
through a lot in his
absolutely.
life. I think he is gonna stick around in the NFL because he is a talent. And I think somebody will figure out how to bring it out of him in the appropriate ways. And that's what, the guys in the NFL make the big bucks for.
And I think
Um,
he's built to play linebacker in the NFL. I think he can, if he's going to add some weight, he's going to be athletic enough to play linebacker. His tackling needs to improve dramatically for him to be able to stick around on a roster. At the very least, he could be a special teams guy for now and make an impact that way. And the other guy, Leonard Taylor, 5-star, everybody loved. And again, we made comments that his motor wasn't there, that he didn't make enough plays, that he would only play hard selectively, and that wasn't enough to really earn the sort of hype that he had. And you end up seeing it with him not being drafted, and it's unfortunate. I think had he come back to school one more year and really worked on the things he needed to work on, maybe he wouldn't have been a first-round pick, but at least he probably maybe would have been a third or fourth-round pick.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. All right, we're gonna get to mailbag questions in a little bit. You guys sent us a ton of mailbag questions, some really good topics, and I did my Manny Navarro research to answer some of these
At
that
least one
you
of us did.
at least one of us did, correct. We're gonna give you our thoughts on your questions in a little bit. But I wanted to do this episode kind of stealing an idea from a colleague of mine. They came out with the sort of Mount Rushmore a couple weeks ago. Ari Wasserman, Mitch Light, my editor. Ari, of course, is one of our national columnists over at The Athletic. He's got a podcast until Saturday, which I will be on later this week. I will be part of discussing a series that we just came out with, me and eight other reporters, involving NIL. We talked to a bunch of agents and players and player personnel people, coaches, to sort of shed some light on what's happening with the transfer portal and how guys end up, getting from one school to the other, year to year to year, and just how the whole process works. So we had a whole story on that. But Ari had a great podcast, I thought, this week, discussing the biggest villains in college football history. And I thought, man, that is a great idea. It's a fun sort of off season, the middle of May conversation to have. Who are the greatest villains in college football? But let's turn it to Miami Hurricanes, right? Like, and so it got me thinking, doing some deep thoughts, Carlos. And I thought, well, there's really been three eras of Hurricanes football when you think about it. One of them is the Jurassic period, okay, when dinosaurs ruled the earth, 1926 to 1978, before Howard Schnellenberger got there. I can't really think of any villains that would be in the Miami Hurricanes craw at the time, other than the guys who pulled off the Gator flop way back when. That was disrespectful, and that's part of the reason why Miami fans hate the Gators so much. But anyway, we didn't include, at least I didn't, when I did my own research and I came up with my own perspective villains for this thing that you and I are going to do. I didn't think of anybody from that time period. Then after the Jurassic period, Carlos, there's the classic period of Hurricanes football, 1979 to what I will say is 2003, right up until Sean Taylor, Vince Wilfork, and all those guys ended up going pro. The golden era, so to speak. I just didn't want to call it the golden era because, that's kind of reference to Al Golden. But the golden era of Hurricanes football, when this team won 5 national championships and probably should have won more. And then there's what I like to call now as the suctaceous period of
I thought you were,
Hurricanes
yeah, I thought
football.
you were say the Gaga era, but the Sectatious period that
I
works.
wanted it to sound kind of scientific. The suctaceous
Right.
era, which is basically 2004 to present, when the Canes have sucked a lot.
Or
I'm
or you
very
could have
accurate.
called it the meh Sozoic era.
That could have come up with that name as well. But so I came up with 2 lists. I figured if we're gonna come up with villain candidates, Carlos, you and I should probably go back and forth here having this conversation. But I split it up by periods. There is the classic period of Hurricanes football, the one that you and I and everybody associated with Miami football
The
feels
the
good
one
about.
that we all hang on to dearly with our cold dead hands. That's
Correct.
been gone and by for like over 20 years, that we all still believe somehow will be resurrected and still exists.
Right. And then we have the suctaceous period, which is something that
The
for
reality we've been living for the last 20 plus years.
yes, yes, the suctaceous period has sucked. So I figured let's start with this. Let's start with we'll call the classic period of Hurricane football. I'm going to go with who I think is the number one villain. I'm going to give you my first offering.
I already know what you're gonna say.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I have it right here, but I'm gonna let you say it because it's your guy.
It's referee Terry Porter.
Oh, look at that. You did not go the way I was gonna go. I thought you meant like villain as in people that would perceive hurricanes that would be perceived as villains by other people.
No, 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 no. These are people who hurt Miami
Okay,
through the classic period and the suctaceous period. Although
definitely Terry Porter.
I will definitely tell you there are former Hurricanes on the list because as much as they might be heroes for you, they could flip sides and turn into a villain. Right?
Yep.
I mean, that's part of the appeal here of sports, right? Guys can go be really, really good and then all of a sudden turn heel. And I think for some of us, at least for me, when I was thinking of this list, there's some guys that I thought, man, these people really hurt Miami. And even though they were on our side or Miami's side for a little while. So anyway, number one, referee Terry Porter cost Miami their sixth national championship, pulled the flag on Glenn Sharp really, really late. Miami was all fireworks were already going off at the Fiesta Bowl. Miami was celebrating its sixth national championship, and Terry Porter decides to throw the flag. All these years later, it's still debatable whether or not that was pass interference. Extremely debatable. In fact, I don't think it was pass interference. But anyway, the point is he was flagged. It cost Miami its sixth national championship. To me, he's the number one villain.
I agree. I would put that right up there. And also to add to that, not only was that not pass interference, but there was offensive pass interference on the fourth down that they converted on that out route that I think was like 4th and 12 or something like that. And they did not call that as a receiver pushed off before he caught the football. And the referee stuck that down his throat, stuck that flag down his throat, but they called that bullshit one in the end zone. Anyway, fun fact, one of my first dates with my wife, we went to go see that game at a friend's house. And we've been together ever since. So I'm not making any correlations here, but my relationship is fantastic. I've traded in hurricane success for a wonderful marriage. So sorry, guys.
All right, Carlos, number two on my list. And again, this is from the classic period of
Well,
Hurricanes
let
football.
me give you one. Let me give you
Go ahead.
one.
Give me one of yours.
George Teague.
Yes, that's a very good one. 1992
The
Sugar
90,
Bowl.
yeah, 92 season, 93 Sugar Bowl. That image of him running down Lamar Thomas and stripping him from behind when the Hurricanes were starting to make that comeback, that hurts me deeply. And that before Terry Porter, that to me was number one.
All right. I understand as a Miami guy who grew up in the city, George Teague, definitely a strong candidate for a Mount Rushmore of Miami Hurricanes villains in the classic period. I would add this name, and it may not mean much to you, or you may say, who am I talking about? That's Alexander Wolf, Carlos. Are you familiar with Alexander Wolf?
Is that the referee who said Cleveland Gary fumbled?
No, that's
But I
not
would
the
put that
guy.
guy up there also.
He is on my list. Those that referee is on my list. Alexander Wolf is Sports Illustrated writer who wrote Why the University of Miami Should Drop Football. I think when you think about Canes haters and guys that were quote unquote villainous to the program, he wrote, of course, in the 90s that Miami should drop football. There was a huge headline. Miami's the only university who's ever been treated that way by the sports publication. And to me, that makes Alexander Wolf a villain. Agree or disagree?
I agree. But you know what? To me, journalists don't count as villains because we don't. No offense. To me, it would be more impactful in terms of anybody that has an impact on the field to hurt the Hurricanes. I mean, when somebody's just
I
writing
can
something
see
in an
that.
article, when somebody's just writing an article and spewing stuff out of their butt, to me, it really doesn't matter.
I think the reason I listed him here, and I kind of went off the field on a couple of different guys, Carlos. To me, it's because when you think of Miami and you think of people who criticize Miami to this day, people still bring up that article. Miami shouldn't have
Yeah.
a football program. Miami should, they were the bad boys, this and that. They were bad for college football. And I think as we get further and further away from the day that magazine ran, I think people realize, you know what? Miami was just ahead of its time. That's all they were. They were ahead of their time.
So what? NIL, Pell Grants, same thing. Doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying? I'll give you another one. A guy who was relentlessly talked crap about Miami throughout his career, and now as a journalist, as a announcer, or a guy that works for College Football Network, but also did it on the field as well. Lou Holtz.
That's correct. Former Notre Dame coach Lou Holtz is a good selection.
And what's impressive to me about Lou Holtz is he talks all that shit, and you could tell he's talking shit because of that lisp in his mouth.
Right, right. It gives us a dead giveaway.
Get the crap out of your mouth, Lou. Maybe you'll lose the lisp.
Well, they're number 4 on my list, but I put in the 1988 referees in the Miami Notre Dame game who called Cleveland Gary's fumble a fumble when it
Yeah.
wasn't a fumble and cost Miami a chance at 3 consecutive national championships. They won in 87, they won in 89, and they certainly would have won in 88 with that squad if it wasn't for that BS fumble call on
Yep.
Cleveland Gary. And so I would lump in my Notre Dame hate, right, and your Notre Dame hate with the
Yes.
referees and say those guys were absolutely the biggest one of the biggest villains of all time.
Absolutely. I cannot stand those referees. To think the Hurricanes could have won, if you're talking about 86, 87, 88, 89, maybe 4 straight national championships,
Mm-hmm.
how ridiculous would that have been? And how could, imagine, the mystique now, imagine that, right? 4 straight national championships, how they would have been cemented in the college football pantheon and the amount of hate people would have gotten or would have given the Hurricanes for being that good during that time.
Here's another name from the 80s that may affect you, Carlos. Penn State linebacker Pete Giftopoulos, which
Oh, Jesus.
it's only fitting that his name was Giftopoulos when Vinny Testaverde was handing out gifts in the 86 Fiesta Bowl. 5 of them, 5 interceptions in that game, cost Miami a national championship.
I've got one from that game as well, but it's going to be a weird one. Mark Trestman,
Yes, Miami's
offensive
offensive
coordinator
coordinator.
who
Yes,
supposedly gave the game plan away to Penn State before the game. That's the rumor. I don't know.
that's it's a good, sort of off-season mystery story for me to dig into, Carlos.
Yeah, dig into that whole thing because there's a whole conspiracy theory that Trustman was pissed off. Wasn't getting along with Jimmy Johnson. He was going to leave at the end of the season. He
Yeah.
wanted to be the head coach, did not get the job, and he decided, you know what? Screw you guys. I'm throwing the game.
All right, here's somebody that's on the field that hurt Miami. A very infamous play in college football history, a very good quarterback. Doug Flutie, Boston College, author of Hail Flutie, and one of the most painful losses in Miami history.
If you're gonna go with that one, then you got to add Frank Reich. I think both guys should be on the
Right.
list.
The week before, Frank Reich led Maryland to a ridiculous comeback against Miami, and the Hurricanes lost the last 3 games of that 85 season, including the bowl game to UCLA.
Yeah, where they got smashed, and then the year after, was it that season? The year after they got smashed by Tennessee
Yes, correct.
in the bowl game.
Yeah.
I've got a good one for you. Another one. This one's not talked about enough, but Ty Detmer.
Yes, Ty Detmer was on my list. Thank you for including Ty Detmer, the 1990 season opener. A lot of pain for Kelvin Harris, a big fan of our show and former Hurricane center for Gino Torretta. He talks to me about that BYU loss. In fact, I'd love to bring him on one time to just discuss that BYU loss. Nothing else, because he's going to just tell you why Miami's going 15-0 and winning the national championship. But Kelvin can certainly speak to what it was like to go to Provo, Utah, and get their ass kicked by the Cougars.
And then not be able to drink afterwards, drink their sorrows away because it's a dry town.
All right, a couple more people I have on my list here for the classic period, Carlos. Number 1, the wussy announcers at CBS for calling Miami out for running up the score on Notre Dame in Jerry Faust's last game in 1985. To me, they started the narrative of Miami being a bunch of bad boys. Jimmy Johnson, of course, no mercy in that game, wanted to beat Notre Dame badly, which is fine. But people forget how many times Notre Dame did the same exact thing to opponents on their schedule, and this time they had to drink the medicine. But to me, the wussy announcers at CBS, you guys are villains in my mind.
Yeah, baby. You didn't know that Jimmy Johnson was a member of the Cobra Kai dojo. No mercy, right? Because mercy does not and fear do not exist in this dojo.
No, not at all. And then the last one here for me, Carlos, among candidates, the Washington Huskies, who put an end to Miami's 58-game home winning streak. I was there that afternoon, Carlos, for that loss, and
Shocking. That's why they lost.
I can tell you that it was a very sad day. I was shocked walking out of the Orange Bowl. I had never seen Miami lose at home in all the years I'd been alive,
Yeah.
and that one stung.
Yeah, that one sucked. I'll give you a one that's another off the wall one. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and I ain't talking about the basketball player.
Yes, the running back.
You remember he went off on the Hurricanes and Butch Davis in that season opener when they played UCLA.
At UCLA,
And,
yeah.
At UCLA, and it sort of shocked the Hurricanes into reality and us as a fan base into reality that, hey, we ain't that team anymore. We're getting smoked. Um, as a whole team, I would also like to volunteer the Arizona Wildcats
Mm,
for the
yes.
disaster in the desert.
Eight. Yes. 29-0.
29-0. Coming off that that season where the Hurricanes took a dip following the long run of success, and just got drilled there in the Fiesta Bowl. That was not fun to watch, as a fan.
Let's move on to the suctaceous period, shall we?
It's hard to have villains when you suck,
Yeah. Well,
right?
that's
Like to have a villain, right? To have an arch nemesis, you've got to be a superhero. When you are just an average dude and you're facing a villain, that's not a villain. You're just a victim. There has to be some sort of right. Like you can't face the Joker unless you're Batman, right? If it's me facing the Joker, it's just that's stupid. There's nothing's gonna happen. Like nobody cares. If the Joker
yeah.
beats the crap out of me, it's supposed to happen. I'm an extra in the story.
Right. Well, that's why I didn't put Bobby Bowden in. I didn't put a lot of other guys who that have faced Miami on the field. Coaches, Deion Sanders. Miami won the majority of the time they played against Florida State in the 80s and 90s. There weren't many situations where Florida State was in control of the series. And so to me, the suctaceous period is you're right. It's more of pointing the finger at yourself if you're Miami. And so here's number one on my list. And again, maybe this is unfair. I'm probably gonna have a bunch of people call me out and tell me I'm an asshole for saying this. But
Well, they're gonna tell you that anyway.
number one on my list, Carlos, Donna Shalala, president of the University of Miami. As much as
Over Nevin Shapiro.
over Nevin Shapiro, who is there, the
Wow.
convicted Ponzi schemer who was dumb enough to get caught
Wow.
and bring the program down with him. Donna Shalala, I would say, because the program didn't really invest money the way it needed to in hiring coaches. Yes, they hired head coaches. They kept Randy Shannon. They promoted Larry Coker. They did all kinds of stuff to try to foster what they had in the early 2000s. But it never worked because they didn't pay for assistant coaches. And I think if you look at every single one of the head coaches Miami had in place, they didn't have the budgets to go out and bring in big OCs or DCs. And so to me, Miami's number one villain, I think, in a lot of people's minds is the leadership. And maybe it's not just Donna Shalala, it's the people who are part of the board of trustees, the people who just thought, well, we're in Miami. We're always just going to recruit great players because we're in the mecca of football, right? All these great athletes come out of here. And I think until now, until you had some different people put in charge and say, hey, we need to spend money on football, Miami's been stuck in the suctaceous period because of it.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think a lot of people would disagree with you. I think most Canes fans have a disdain for Donna Shalala and the Donna Shalala era. So, I think you're very accurate and on point with that. And I think to be quite honest, I think you're pandering. You're pandering to the crowd because you need some positivity out of these people who rail you on a weekly basis. But I've got a team in mind and I've got a person in mind for this particular era. I will go with the person first. Mac Brown.
Yes, he was on my list. He was on my list.
Mac
Absolutely.
Mac Brown has owned the Hurricanes ever since he came back to North Carolina, and just can't beat him. Can't beat him.
Won the
And
last 5 games against Miami.
that's not fun. It's not fun to
Yeah.
watch.
I was going to
Okay.
throw this stat out for Miami fans. The most losses Miami has to a particular school. Do you know who the top three are? It seems pretty easy for you, Carlos, to figure this one out. The top three schools that have beaten Miami the most,
Well, Florida State has to be one.
right?
I would go with Notre Dame.
Notre Dame is number three, and then Florida. Florida
Florida.
is number
Okay.
two. And that's only because they've played them more than
So
everybody
many
else.
times, right?
Miami is 35 and 33 all time versus FSU, 29 and 27 against Florida, and 8, 18 and 1 against Notre Dame. But why do you think I'm bringing this up?
Because North Carolina is number 4 now.
That's correct. Notre Dame, North Carolina has moved up to number 4. Miami is 11 and 16 all time against North Carolina. They have been a thorn in Miami's side, and mainly because of Mac Brown for the last 7 or 8 years.
They have been a butt plug in the Miami Hurricanes, a noose for the last 5 years, and it has not been fun.
Correct. All right. You said you had a team as well?
A team who, quite honestly, I never thought would be a thorn in the Hurricane side, and apparently every time we play them, we just can't beat them. Wisconsin.
Yes, that's another good one. It's another good one. What is it? 3 bowl losses to them? The Orange Bowl, the
starting
Pinstripe
with that,
Bowl, and the one in
starting with that
Orlando.
Russell Athletic Bowl in 09,
Right.
was it? With
Yeah.
Ja'Cory Harris and that team.
Teddy
Uh,
Bridgewater.
Yeah, they're looking Teddy Bridgewater. That's Louisville, man. Wasn't it?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of yes, because they played in Orlando against
Right.
Louisville the year after. I'm thinking of
They
correct.
they got beat by Wisconsin in the bowl game there, and there was a Champ Sports Bowl. I was there in
Mm-hmm.
Orlando. It was like 40 degrees in
Yes.
Orlando watching that bowl game. A full bottle of vodka was not enough to warm me for that game. And these freaking idiots from Wisconsin are walking around with overalls and they're shirtless, and it's like, dude, what are you guys doing? Seriously, 40 degrees.
I
Your
thought red
nipples are
and
about to fall off.
I thought red and white, and I confused Louisville too. I've been to too many bowl games, Carlos. My mind is lost. But Teddy Bridgewater is sort of a villain for Miami because he, instead of coming to Miami, he
He
went,
just
he went to Louisville. He kind of played a
exactly
factor in that too, right?
right.
Teddy's a great guy, by the way, coaching Miami Northwestern High School now in football. Here's somebody who I think most Miami fans would agree with. I'm going to throw this one at you. Mark D'Onofrio, defensive coordinator,
Yeah,
would
everybody
have
hates
to have
D'Onofrio.
his face on the Mount Rushmore of villains for Miami football for the suctaceous period.
There are few people like Hurricane fans. Yeah, we all love the Hurricanes, but we agree on very few things, right? There's a split in the fan base for almost any topic you discuss, just because that's who we are. You know, generally people from South Florida and fans of the Hurricanes and of South Florida teams. Just we're just bitter, angry people, and we like to bicker about things, and that's why we never agree on anything. But everyone, I think, 100% of fans surveyed would probably say they do not like Mark D'Onofrio.
100%. And I think what's crazy is D'Onofrio was one of the coolest guys I ever got to know just from a reporter coach perspective. He would sit there and talk to us about people on the team and things he was trying to do. But his approach, him and Al Golden had the wrong idea of what it was going to take to win at Miami. And I just think to all the images shared on social media of Miami's linebackers basically being back where
20
the
yards deep.
safeties are on goal line type situations instead of up close to the line of scrimmage, and just people being so angry about that, Carlos, and being so mad at D'Onofrio for not getting the defense better. And when you think about it, Miami actually had some really good offensive players here
Yeah,
while he was the coordinator, and they just couldn't win because they couldn't get play defense.
yeah, and I mean, the Jed Fish era, I think they were especially really good on offense.
Mm-hmm.
And they had an opportunity to be a lot better than they were, and they just couldn't put it together on defense.
Yeah. Here's somebody that's familiar, and again, I mentioned earlier when we started this list that we may have somebody who was a hero turned villain. This guy epitomizes that for Miami football. Butch Davis.
Ooh, Butch Davis.
Butch Davis went to North Carolina after failing in the NFL. Let's face it, he helped the Cleveland Browns to the playoffs, I think, once, and then ended up back at North Carolina. Turned North Carolina into a good program, recruited really, really well. I think beat Miami a few times, and then he really stuck it to the Hurricanes when he went to FIU and he handed Miami what we will call the worst loss in school history. Was there celebrating it, enjoying it. And what I think about Butch Davis, think about how many times his name was brought up as a potential coach at Miami while the Hurricanes were struggling with Al Golden, while they were struggling with Randy Shannon, before Mark Richt got here. Everybody wanted Butch Davis back. And instead, he went from building the greatest team in college football history in 2001 and leaving it in the hands of Larry Coker to a bad guy for Miami.
It reminds me of when Hulk Hogan, flipped to the NWO, right? Like Hulk Hogan was the great All-American hero. He was everybody's favorite wrestler. The dude just personified goodness, right? Work out, say your prayers, eat your vitamins, get a good night's sleep, all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, he turns into Hollywood Hogan. And I think that's a perfect analogy for Butch Davis.
Yeah, it really was. And then of course Nevin Shapiro, who we've already mentioned, he's
Yeah.
come back. He's got his Instagram page. He's trying to get people to watch him. I don't know what's going on with him, but I'll leave Nevin be. He just spent a long time in jail and just got out. One other guy I wanted to mention who I think could potentially be a problem for the years to come if he
Oh,
stays
I know,
there.
I know who you're gonna say.
Go ahead, Carlos. Guess.
Manny Diaz.
No, not Manny
I was
Diaz.
like, oh, you're thinking Manny Diaz because everybody hated him on
No,
the way out.
no, I was gonna reference my favorite coach according to the Miami fan base, Mike Norvell,
Oh, Mike
Florida State's
Norvell.
coach, who has shown that he knows how to work the transfer portal, and he rebuilt Florida State faster than Mario could. Now, he did have a head start, Carlos. He did have a head start by a couple of years, but Mike Norvell won the ACC championship. Alabama wanted him. They considered taking him and interviewed him for the job. And now he is entrenched as Florida State's coach. Now, look, we don't know what's going to happen to the ACC for years to come. It may break apart here in the next few years because of court battles and whatever. We don't know what's going to happen with college football with pay for play and revenue sharing and all that other stuff. But assuming things stay the same and Florida State remains in the ACC and a rival to Miami for years to come, he could potentially become the biggest villain post Suctatious period.
He could be, yes. I'm gonna add another team to the Suctatious villain if we're gonna just because it is maybe number 2 behind that FIU loss, Middle Tennessee. I will now
Right.
forever hate the Middle Tennessee Blue Raiders because that was embarrassing.
It was embarrassing for sure. All right. I hope you enjoyed our list. This is just suggestions. Maybe we do a vote, Carlos. We can get people to vote who the biggest villains are. Make some of the suggestions here on the podcast. Message us on Twitter, whatever works for you. But I wanted to have a little sort of fun period to discuss greatest villains in Miami Hurricanes history. Hope you enjoyed it. We're gonna get to the mailbag in a second, but you brought up guys who made bad decisions to go to the NFL early. I'm gonna leave you the floor because I'm pretty sure you have a list of guys and
Well,
we can discuss
the
this.
number 1 guy is not even a player, and we just talked about him, Butch Davis.
Right.
That was one of the dumbest decisions in Hurricanes history. Had he stayed another year, won that national championship, maybe instead of going to the Browns, he goes somewhere else with a little bit more potential, gets a better job, doesn't go to Cleveland, which is at the time NFL Siberia, and just ruin his career really. And after that, yes, he got the North Carolina job, but then after that, it was a downward spiral.
Right.
You could say Howard Schnellenberger's decision to leave was also a pretty bad one for a USFL team that never came to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
His career continued, but it was never at the level of the success he had at Miami, winning that national championship. I think guys now like James Williams and Leonard Taylor, you got to throw up there because they were 5-star guys projected to be first rounders coming out of high school,
Yep.
and ended up getting drafted in the 7th round, and one not drafted at all. So those are some guys that come to mind immediately. You also got guys like Mark Walton, who had a great season in Miami, but really didn't capitalize and didn't reach his full potential. I think here at the University of Miami, you've got a ton of guys who left early a little bit and could have been bigger stars. But to me, that's just something to think about. I think it's really a byproduct of
Joe
like
Yerby. Joe Yerby's one that
Joe
comes to
Yerby.
mind.
Joe Yerby
Right.
was the only one that came to mind. It's a byproduct of guys needing to make money for their family, right? Or having personal situations a lot of times that they need to capitalize on and try and get into the NFL and start making money. But sometimes that short-sightedness ends up costing them more down the road because they don't end up sticking on an NFL roster being as successful as they could have been.
Yep. No question about that. All right. If you have some suggestions, again, leave them here and respond to the YouTube channel, or you can text us. I want to get to really the questions that you guys have for us in the mailbag with a little bit of quick news. 2027 schedule update, in case you were wondering, Carlos. Miami has added Troy to the 2027 schedule. That would be Troy, the school located in Alabama. Miami's home schedule for 2027 includes South Carolina, Troy, Cal, Georgia Tech, Louisville, and Virginia. The road schedule: Duke, Florida State, NC State, Virginia Tech. They still got 2 more games
Listen,
they've
the
got to
only
schedule.
the only Troy I care about is the old song by Pete Rock and CL Smooth. Will they reminisce over you?
All right, that is a reference. I'll give you that one, dude. I will give you that one. All right, let's go to the mailbag questionnaire, which I'm trying to get to here, but I got too many responses to other stuff as well. All right, let's go to the mailbag. All right, this is question from Green Tree Kane JRS on Twitter. I've been told a few folks are leaving, and we still expect to get 2 or 3. Is that the case? Well, JRS, I will tell you this: from surfing through the transfer portal and seeing the names that are available, there were guys that have sort of added their names here late in the process. I think if Miami can add a safety or an edge rusher, I think if there's quality there, a guy who's not injured or coming off injury, somebody who can pass a physical, I think there's certainly the case. And I think as far
That's a
as
really low bar. Can get past
yes,
the physical.
well, but that's the unfortunate aspect. I think some of these guys were injured, probably had to have surgery. Their coaches are like, you know what, you're not going to play this year anyway. We don't need you on scholarship. Hit the road. I think that's been the case with a few people because everybody's trying to maximize all 85 scholarships, Carlos. So, if somebody has surgery and let's say in August they pass a physical, and they're able to be added to the roster, I think Miami would entertain it. I think there's some good players available, but this is what it's become. It's just like the NFL. The same thing happens in the NFL, by the way.
Yeah,
Guys get released after having an injury. So pro football is certainly beginning to mirror it in college. So I think that's something to think about. But as far as guys leaving, there are guys who I think will medically retire, like Zion Nelson, for instance. He's still technically on the roster. Will he medically retire? Probably. There are other guys that have dealt with injuries that just sort of left and disappeared and graduated and moved on. So yes, I still think there will be guys who quote unquote leave slash retire or just become students. It happens every single year. So that 85 scholarship number, don't worry about it. I would tell you, I think Miami is going to be fine. If they can add somebody they think can help them, they'll do it.
they'll find a way.
Yep. All right. This comes from Jeremy Marks Peltz, who does an excellent job with videos. I don't know if you've seen him on Twitter.
JMPZ.
JMPZ's done some good things. He says, one thing about the 2024 Hurricanes, do you disagree or agree with the masses on is there something that you agree or disagree with that the masses seem to be excited about, Carlos, when it comes to Miami?
That the offense is automatically going to score 40 points.
Okay. What's your reason
I
for it?
The offensive coordinator. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. I just don't think this guy can call. I think his forte is scripting the
Yep.
first few series,
I can
and
agree
then
with that.
after that, he's got no answers to anything that a defense does. So if he faces a defense that is good at adjusting, that could counter his initial script, and you've seen that in the second half of games last season, then I think that offense will be in trouble. And I don't think that he has quite the freedom to call the shots as many people would think. I think when things get tight, Mario steps in. As I've made the mention before, you only see Mario with the headsets on and the mic down when they're on offense.
Right.
So there's something to that. And I think the Hurricanes, whenever things get tight or when games get close, especially in the second half, you see them go double wing, double tight end, and hammer the ball on inside zone a lot. And if that's going to be the case again this year, even with Cam Ward, it's not going to be successful.
All right. I'm gonna skip Jeremy's bonus question and save it for a second here, just because I think Rashawn 954's question kind of goes hand in hand. What kind of season does Shannon Dawson need to have to get free T-shirts from Carlos? This is from Rashawn 954.
I don't know about what kind of season, but I told Rashawn he's got to give me $30 for a free T-shirt.
There you go. This is the bonus question from JMP. Is CPA Carlos as funny as podcast Carlos?
First of all, tax preparer, Carlos, because I'm not a CPA. I'm only a licensed attorney. I do not want to falsely claim I have certain distinctions, certifications, or licensures that I do not have. Only when I'm delivering bad tax news. So I try to crack a joke whenever somebody owes over $10,000 in taxes. Hey, feel better? No.
Yeah, it usually doesn't work whatsoever for these guys.
No. Vodka helps, but it's not going to take that away either.
Yes. All right. This is from Columbus Kane Columbus 9744. Who do you see as our starting two cornerbacks and safeties? Seems like these are the most concerning positions right now. Yes, I think you're onto something, Columbus Kane. I think Daryl Porter and Damari Brown will be
Yep.
the starting cornerbacks, and I think Dione Hill will be the starting nickelback, the Marshall transfer, and then
Mm-hmm.
I think the starting safeties will probably be Michelle
Mitch Powell.
Powell or with Jadis Richard or Jaden Harris. Whoever ends up doing the better job in the fall will get that sort of fifth starting job in the secondary because I think they're only going to play two linebackers most downs.
Yep, I agree.
With how often teams throw the football.
But you know what? It's interesting. I think based on what we saw last year, they looked really good in that 3-3 stack, and I think that's something they should really incorporate throughout the season, mix it in, because it gave them a little bit more flexibility, especially against teams that were doing a good job running the football against them. They really shut Clemson down with that, and because of necessity due to injuries, they had to go to that 3-3 stack. But I think it's a great wrinkle they can use in their defense.
This is from Hurricane Dave, Visionless Dave 2 on Twitter. The Hurricanes should play the Gators every year. True or false?
True, but the Gators are scared.
I agree. I think Miami and Florida should play every single year. I think Miami and UCF and USF should probably alternate games. Like one year you play USF, the next year you play UCF. I think all of this is good for the state in general, right? To generate excitement. I think Miami, Florida, Florida State, UCF, and USF need to sort of build on those rivalries, especially with how much college football is changing. The fact that you now have Cal and Stanford in the Atlantic Coast Conference and you're playing teams from other parts of the country that you normally wouldn't. Now they're conference foes. I think you need to sort of feed the beast in the state and get people excited about rivalries in the state. And I think UCF certainly they've done a good enough job going to the Big 12 now to become a regular opponent, to be part of a quote unquote Big Four, even though they've never won a national championship on the field. I think
Well, according to them, they have.
I like the fact Miami's playing USF. I think they have the right coach and Alex Golish now. I think it's cool that Miami and the city of Tampa go head to head in with their college teams. I think that's good. I think it's good for football. I'd like to see those things. And I certainly would love to see them play the Gators more often. We will see what happens with college football. Again, so many huge questions about what pay for play, TV contracts, revenue sharing, all of that stuff that's gonna sort of evolve here as well as conference realignment maybe having to back pay guys for NIL that they weren't able to get the last few years. All of that is going to become a huge factor. So we don't know where college football is headed, but I will say this: if you can get state teams to play each other, it's fun. It's good for the fan base. It expands excitement. I like that
Yeah, and you
for
should
many
also have like
reasons.
little trophies or little kind of like Paul
Rivalries,
Bunyan's
yeah,
axe. Yeah, Paul Bunyan's axe, or like they used to do in NCAA football,
right.
whatever the Seminole War canoe trophy. And I think when they Miami versus USF, they should have a specific one, the real Cuban sandwich trophy.
All right. So
Because
this is for
Tampa claims to have the original and best Cuban sandwich, by the way. If you're not aware of that, they are full of shit.
yes.
But yes, they claim that.
All right. This is from Scary Rhombus on Twitter. One of your favorites, Carlos, Scary Rhombus.
I
Uh,
love geometrical names. That's always a highlight of my day.
How many current college football coaching staffs could win 10 plus games with the Canes roster and schedule? I think most Power 4 staffs could. So maybe 30 to 40. Which staffs in the ACC could win 10 with our situation?
Okay. Um, Louisville, Florida State. I'll give you an off the wall one. Wake Forest,
Dave Clawson's a very good coach.
damn
Absolutely.
good coach. I don't think Manny Diaz maybe. um,
Mac
SMU
Brown could.
and Mac Brown could. Well, I could tell you what, he'd get one win.
I would say NC State's Dave Doran probably could.
Dave Doran's a good coach, very good coach. Yeah, I mean,
Rhett
listen,
Lashley, he's
yeah, that's
technically
what I
part of
said.
this.
SMU, yeah. But you know what? The better question is, can this coaching staff get 10 wins? That's
Right.
gonna be the question. Like, who
Right.
gives a shit about everybody else? They need to figure out how they can do it with this staff. They
Yep.
better.
This is from Sam Knowlton. 9 and 9.5 wins is the highest over under in a while. I'm in the Manny camp of the bet the under until proven otherwise. What number would you actually feel comfortable betting the over for this year?
8.5.
8.5 for you makes you would bet that 8.5?
I bet over on 8.5.
Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that's as close as you can get. I mean, I would probably stick with nine, just 9 wins. If I had to put money down and say guarantee 9 wins, I would. I think they're definitely going to win at least 9 games, counting the bowl game. If we're not going to just do this to regular season, I think they are without question a 9-win team. The question is, do they blow it in games that they shouldn't? And we will see. This is from Javier J Boy 1724. Mario's talked a lot about Cam and some of the other additions, but has he been asked anything about chemistry? Although these changes make Miami better on paper, chemistry is the one thing to worry about. Javi, I agree. I think that's one thing that you cannot tell, and the transfer portal ultimately, when you're bringing in 30, 40 guys to the transfer portal, like Texas A&M did a couple years ago, I think that's the danger. I think you want to have sort of the perfect sprinkling. I think 10 is a good number for transfer portal additions. You can bring in seniors, guys that are very, very driven versus freshmen or second year or third year guys, because you don't know what baggage they're bringing with you. And so I think in Miami's case, I mentioned earlier the additions via the portal. The youngest guy among the transfer additions is Dione Hill and Damian Martinez. They've been in college for 2 seasons. This will be their third year coming up. Everybody else, fourth, fifth, 6 year guys. So I think as long as you can sort of maintain your base, which I think Mario has done with the roster for the most part, he hasn't had to like load up on any single position. Maybe defensive line is the most. Um, you have a pretty good I think you should have pretty good chemistry in the locker room. And if one of those guys becomes a cancer or becomes problematic, you kick them off the team and you just go with what you got. But I think 13 guys is sort of the right number. You don't want to go too far over that in terms of additions via the portal.
And again, bringing Butch Davis back up, I think the genius of Butch Davis and what he did as a recruiter was the incorporation of a sports psychologist to identify personality types and way to identify and suss out those traits in players that would fit with his overall culture and scheme. And I think when you're going into the transfer portal, even when you're recruiting high school guys, you need to try and align yourself and align the guys you're bringing in with the culture that you have and the values that you have as a program and as a team, and create some sort of a rubric or something that shows you how these guys check those boxes, where they fit in, if they are that sort of a match that you're looking for, and not just base it on talent and productivity. Because, like you said, in the end, this guy could end up being a cancer. He could end up punching a coach during the season and end up transferring. There's things that can happen within the locker room that talent doesn't overcome. That as talented as a guy may be, he may poison the well, right?
Right. No, there's no question. This is from Junior Zofessional on Twitter. Are we really confident in Shannon Dawson? I remember Dana Holgerson taking over the play calls and Houston media and fan losing confidence in him. My worry is that Dawson lacks creativity and his understanding on how to maximize this offensive roster. What's your take? We've kind of touched on it. Carlos has been pretty hard on Shannon Dawson. Doesn't think he does a good job, adjusting to what defenses do. Let me rephrase the question for you, Carlos. What was Shannon Dawson's best game last year besides Texas A&M? We know when Tyler Van Dyke had man-on-man coverage, he looked good. But is there a game that you sit back there and you say, man, that wasn't too bad with Dawson?
Uh, I mean, there were games where he was okay, there was good. I mean, I can't really honestly think of one off the top of my head other than Texas A&M where I thought, wow, they really carved him up. Um, yeah, I really not one comes to mind, to be honest.
Okay. All right. This is from Jay
There's
Bo
there's there's halves. I think he had some really good first halves where I
hmm
felt really good about what he was doing. I think towards the end of the season, he tried to make some adjustments to make things look a little bit different, move guys around. But yeah, there's not one that really comes to mind.
All right. This one's from Javi. J Boy 1724, another one. Will Miami end up with a better record than FSU? And if so, will you officially ditch the Knowles and become a Canes fan again? Will Miami end up with a better record than FSU?
My hope is yes.
Yeah, I think Miami has the better quarterback. I think Mike Norvell knows that. I think Miami has the better receivers. So yes, I think Miami will win the ACC this year and have a better record than FSU.
Look at that, Manny flip-flopping sides now.
This is from Ruben Valorio. How much trouble is the secondary in if the staff confident in them, or are they hoping the front seven will take care of business to help the secondary? I think they're certainly counting on the front seven to do a good job. Right,
Yeah,
Carlos? I think that's kind of what you go with.
yeah. I think the lack of experience and depth in the secondary is going to hurt. But like you said, and we talked about before, having a front seven that can put pressure, specifically that defensive line that can put pressure on quarterbacks, make him get rid of the football faster, and rush their throws is going to be a huge help to that secondary. The problem is going to be if they load up against somebody that can max protect or has a really good offensive line and can give that quarterback a little bit of time, then there could be issues.
All right. This question is from Brent Peterson, BP 9121. I kind of like this one. I did a lot of research for you, Brent. Who has the best roster in the state right now? So I have these ridiculous Google sheets, which I actually sent to Carlos a little while ago, so you could take a look at it, of information where I sort of add up returning starts, returning snaps, um, all kinds of stuff. 5-star, 4-star, 3-star recruiting information. These like really in-depth team breakdowns. And so I'm sort of in the process of finishing up the ACC now. but I've also done all 5 state schools through the transfer portal in terms of what they're bringing back in terms of starters, snaps, all that kind of stuff. Miami is on paper the most experienced team of the 5, and these 5 are Miami, Florida State, Florida, UCF, and USF. The 5 quote unquote state schools. They have more experience than everybody. 532 starts between them. FSU's next, 525. UCF 524, USF and Florida come in last with 450. Again, starting experience is just one metric that you can use. If you go by positions, Miami's quarterback room has the most experience of anybody, 72 combined starts between Cam Ward, Reese Poffenberger, and Emory Williams. The next closest team is Florida with 54. Graham Mertz makes up a big chunk of that. You go to running back, Miami has the youngest running back room among the state. The most experienced is USF's. Wide receiver, Miami has the third most experienced receiver room. USF and UCF have more. Tight end, Miami is second behind Florida. Offensive line, Miami is second behind Florida State. Defensive line, Miami is overwhelmingly the most experienced defensive line unit. Linebacker, Miami is second behind UCF. And then you look at defensive backs, that's where Miami is the youngest, 69 combined starts. Florida, Florida State, UCF, all with over 100 starts. USF actually has 87 combined starts between everybody in their secondary and college. So to answer your question, Brent, I did the research. I gave you the numbers. Carlos, you can give me your thoughts on everything I just spat out.
Listen, that's a lot of numbers. That's a lot of information.
Yeah.
I would assume that the Hurricanes are at the top of the list right now in terms of talent. Um, the best roster isn't necessarily the most talented roster. I think experience counts for a lot. So I think where there's deficiencies in terms of star talent, there's you make up for that with what I've called in the past, grown ass men, right?
Yep.
The grown ass man factor makes up for the talent gaps in a lot of areas. And I think when Miami finally has enough grown ass men to go along with their talent, and that young talent becomes grown ass men, I think that's when they're going to get back to that elite status. But until then, they're always going to be susceptible to other teams that may not be as talented but have a lot of experienced guys.
All right. This question comes from Vic Vassell, Coach Vic 4. Does Cam Ward throw for 4,000 yards this season, and does Miami have a 1,000-yard back, which they haven't since Mark Walton?
That's tough.
Yeah, Vic, I'm gonna say no. First of all, Vic, just so you know, last year there were only 2 quarterbacks who threw for more than 4,000 yards. Can you name them, Carlos?
Can I name them? Caleb Williams?
Nope.
No. Okay. Yeah, you got me.
Michael Penix Jr. and Bo Nix. Now, Cam Ward finished 8th nationally with 3,736 yards at Washington State. Okay, he finished 8th in passing yardage. I know on paper you look at it and you say, well, if he plays 13 or 14 games, how is he not going to get to 4,000? I'll tell you why. Because Mario Cristobal is Miami's head coach, and he's going to run the football. Yes, the Hurricanes will throw for a lot of yards. And Cam Ward may end up reaching 3,700 yards passing again. But if he does, it's probably going to take him 14 games or 15 games to get there because Miami is committed to being a balanced offense.
Not only that, but Cam Ward got that 3,700 number in a run and shoot offense where they barely ran the football. He had 485 attempts for the year, and if you divide that by 13 games, that's 37 attempts a game. He is not going to attempt throwing the football 37 times a game. I think he's lucky if he gets that 25-28 mark. He'll be just under 30 in terms of attempts, I think, per game for the season. So you're probably going to see, to me, a more realistic number is somewhere between 35 and 3,600. Maybe 3,500, I would say. Hopefully 30 touchdowns. But again, he was in a run and shoot offense, had 485 attempts last year, only had 27 touchdowns. So I would say 30 touchdowns and 3,500 yards would be a reasonable goal or benchmark.
Correct. I think so. And as far as Damian Martinez and the running game, yeah, I think he could reach 1,000 yards. And I think a lot of it will obviously depend on Mark Fletcher's health and how much Damian has to be relied upon. But Miami went out and brought him in to run the football, and he's run for 2,100 yards in 2 seasons. He's a really good back. I think there's no question he will reach the 1,000 yard mark. I would bet the
I'd say
over
it's more
on that.
likely that he reaches 1,000 yards than Cam Ward hits 4,000.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, Alex Avila, Asa Bolts, Alex on Twitter. I'll keep bringing it up, but realignment. UNC is starting to squawk. If we're not actively pursuing a P2 invite, everything else becomes irrelevant. Alex, I understand your concern. Um, and I'll say this for Miami. They are certainly paying attention to what is going on with Florida State and Clemson's lawsuit. I spoke to somebody not too long ago in the administration. Um, they are prioritizing what needs to be prioritizing, what needs to be prioritized, which is NIL, paying your coaches, and
Upgraded
uh,
facilities.
upgrading the facilities would be third at this point. I think right now it's win on the field, make
Yeah,
yourselves sexy. That's what matters. They're never. You could sit here and talk about Miami's facilities. They're never going to have an on-campus stadium. It's just never going to happen. So you can upgrade and build a spaceship for 300 or 400 million dollars, or you could spend 150 million and just upgrade what you have. I think while they're raising the money to still upgrade the facilities, it's not a bigger part to me. It's not as big a deal unless you were going to build an on-campus stadium. That would make a difference. I don't think upgrading the facilities to spaceship level is going to do anything for Miami. What's going to help Miami is putting guys in the NFL and winning championships.
absolutely. I agree 100%. And I think that not only helps, but I think it helps in terms of their profile for making a move to a different conference. I
Mm-hmm.
think the better they become, and the sexier they become as a team because they're winning and they get back to that elite level, I think they become more attractive to those other conferences like the SEC and the Big Ten because that draws national eyeballs. And when Miami's successful, even when they're starting off 6, 7, 8, and 0,
Yep.
the national media pays attention. Eyeballs come down to Miami because they're like, okay, is the sleeping giant finally waking up? No, he's been snoring for 20 years. We're still snoring. But maybe on the off chance that you make some loud noise, we'll pop up and hopefully get this thing back on track. And at that point, you're not only great a great addition because you're winning, but because you're also causing a stir within the media and getting eyeballs on you, which is really what they care about. They want that media
Yeah.
attention to be able to draw in more money, more revenue.
With Miami showing up to the win now party, investing so heavily in the portal has seemingly made coaches lazy and not willing to invest, develop younger talent. Would you agree? This is King Reezy on Twitter. I would disagree,
Yeah,
King Reezy. I think Mario is still prioritizing recruiting over the transfer portal. They still signed 27 high school recruits this last cycle. He still flies all over the country recruiting high school guys. I think what's happening, Reezy, is that coaches are bringing guys in the building. And once you start working with a guy, you have to sort of make the development. Am I going to invest NIL? And am I going to invest energy in developing them? And if the kids are not receptive to both, right? And if the kids start to complain, hey, I'm not getting paid enough money, or the kids start to, not show the kind of effort you want in practice, you have to basically make that read faster because there's no time to mess around, right? You need to upgrade your roster. So I think the investment is how much time you're actually putting in to figuring out, can we help this player? Can this player make us better? Can we honestly develop him the way that needs to be developed? And I think that's across the board in college football, which is why you're seeing so many guys that are freshmen and redshirt freshmen entering the portal. They may go to a school in January, and by the time spring is over, the coach may tell them, dude, you're not a fit here. You're not a culture fit. You're not the kind of player that we thought you were. There's so many other factors in this. And so those reads and those evaluations have to be done faster and they have to be done better. And because the transfer portal exists, you can make change. You're not wasting time. You're not bringing a guy in and saying, well, now we just signed him and we can't replace him for the next 3 or 4 years. No, you can replace a guy right away. Spring semester, post spring semester, early summertime, the end of the season, like it's constant free agency. So to me, I think Miami is still very much investing in their younger players and player development. It's just they're being pickier about who that is. And once they bring those guys on campus, if it doesn't work out, hit the road, Jack.
yeah, and I think listen again because you're dealing with turnover in the roster, you're dealing with the turnover in the coaching staff over the last couple of years. You have an unbalanced roster in terms of classes and the starters. ages and backup ages and depth and how that plays along. So you need to fill holes. You need to create a more balanced roster, and you do that through the transfer portal. In addition, to be able to develop young guys, sometimes they need to sit. Sometimes they need to sit behind a guy that's older that knows what they're doing, and competition breeds development. So the more talented guys you have on a roster, the more those guys can develop. Because if you have a bunch of freshmen on a roster with no seniors or juniors or older guys to compete against, then those young guys, their development is stunted a little bit. They don't have to work as hard. They don't have to push as hard because they have a guaranteed roster spot or a guaranteed amount of snaps because they know there's nobody else there to push them. It also doesn't create an opportunity for them to reach and strive to try and reach a different level of the guy ahead of them and try and surpass them on the roster, which is what made the great Miami team so great, was that level of competition on the roster year in and year out, and guys needing to fight each other for playing time and snaps. So the more balanced your roster is, the more guys you can plug in holes with in the transfer portal. At the end of the day, the transfer portal is a necessary evil now, right? Because you're going to have guys leaving regardless. So you need to plug in those holes. So you need to be able to find out how you use that. Do you use it as just a wholesale change thing where you're constantly turning over 30, 40 guys and bringing guys through the portal, or you're using it as a supplementational tool, which I think is the best way to do it, to supplement your recruiting and plug in those holes? That's the best way to go about it.
Yeah. Carlos, I think we're done. Do you have some t-shirts to plug? Is there a Shannon Dawson t-shirt you might be making?
No, man. I should make a shirt that just says shift, motion, personnel groupings. How about that?
You do that, my brother. Make sure you check out the MIA All Day podcast. Make sure you buy his t-shirts. Carlos, it's fun talking football with you. I know it's the off season. Hopefully you and I can start coaching together. Maybe we get your daughter in a little hoops action out there.
Yeah,
No?
she may be on the roster, but there's no way in hell I'm coaching that. No,
All right,
I'm done.
man. I'm trying
I
to pull you
retired from
out.
coaching a long time ago, man. There's no way.
I'm trying to pull you out, man. I've done the soccer coaching. I'm going to do the basketball coaching this summer at Cooper City High School. I actually ran into Eric Flowers. He was out there. Former Hurricane Eric Flowers was out there. I think he's got some kids or somebody that's family that's playing basketball at Cooper City. So if you're in South Florida, you want to watch me coach, you can go over there, see me.
Yeah, I live vicariously through you. I watch you suffer having to do all that kind of stuff. That's good enough for me.
Thanks for listening to the Wide Right podcast. I'm Manny Navarro. He's Carlos Ledo. We will see you next time.
Peace.